Welcome to the History Maps podcast. So think about how we traditionally define an empire. We usually look for, a capital city, fortified stone walls, maybe vast, sprawling farmlands.
Right, and usually a very thick, unyielding border drawn on a map somewhere.
Exactly. You stand on one side of a river, you are inside the empire. You cross that river, you are outside of it. It is a very terrestrial, dirt-focused way of looking at power.
Which makes sense because that is entirely based on the logic of agrarian societies. To build a traditional state, you need to control land, tax the harvest, and, well, conscript the peasants who work that land. That has been the standard blueprint for civilization for millennia.
Right, that is what we are all taught. But then you turn your attention to ancient Southeast Asia, specifically the central and southern coasts of what is today Vietnam, and that entire blueprint just gets thrown out the window.
It really does. The borders just vanish. The capital cities are totally decentralized.
Yeah, and that brings us to our mission for this deep dive. We're going to explore the Champa people. This is an ancient civilization that built an empire not out of dirt and walls, but out of water, trade winds, and localized choke points.
We will be looking at their early origins, their highly complex social structures, and their centuries-long clash with the land-based empires that surrounded them.
And for you listening, if you have ever wondered how a culture survives at the absolute epicenter of global trade blending, entirely different religions, languages, and economic strategies over a span of centuries, well, the history of the Chams provides a very clear blueprint.
It is a detailed study in adaptation.
Okay, let us unpack this. Let us establish exactly who we're talking about and where they came from. We're looking at a period starting around 1000 BCE, stretching to about 200 CE. This is associated with something called the Sahain culture.
Right.
So who are the ancestors of the Champa? Because they are fundamentally different from the people surrounding them on the mainland.
To understand the Chams, you really have to zoom out. You have to look at one of the most notable human migrations in history, which is the Austronesian expansion.
Oh.
The ancestors of the Chams were these highly skilled ocean-going navigators. Their origins trace back to Taiwan and Borneo.
Wait, so we're talking about the same broader linguistic and cultural family that eventually populated places like Madagascar, Hawaii, and Easter Island.
Precisely. They possessed outrigger canoe technology and a deep understanding of celestial navigation that allowed them to cross open oceans safely.
Right, which is no small feat.
Not at all. And between 1000 and 500 BCE, a branch of these seafarers sailed into the coast of present-day central Vietnam and simply decided to stay.
Okay, so they set up camp.
Yes. And what is crucial to grasp here is that they are the only Austronesian ethnic group to establish a major civilization on the mainland of Southeast Asia.
Really? The only one?
Yes. The interior of the continent had already been populated thousands of years earlier via land routes by Austroasiatic-speaking peoples. Those are the ancestors of the Khmer and the Mon.
So the ancestors of the Chams show up on the coast, and they are completely distinct from everyone else around them.
Completely.
Linguistically, culturally, technologically, they are totally different from the agrarian societies living just a few dozen miles inland.
Exactly. And because they arrived from the open ocean, their entire orientation remained toward the water. They looked east, not west.
Which makes sense given their background.
Right. And the geography of central Vietnam heavily influenced this too. It is characterized by these short, very steep rivers flowing down from the Annamite Mountains directly into the sea.
So there's not a lot of room for, massive farming operations.
No, there are no vast, sprawling river deltas there to support the kind of intensive rice agriculture that builds a large continental empires. So instead of a land empire, the Chams formed a thalassocracy.
A thalassocracy. Let us break down that term for the listener, because it is central to everything the Chams achieved.
It is the defining concept for them.
Right. So instead of an empire fenced in by walls, a thalassocracy is a maritime empire. Think of it like a modern network of toll booths and shipping lanes.
That is a very accurate way to picture it.
The power does not come from owning the physical dirt. It comes from controlling the flow of traffic.
Yeah.
The Chams basically position themselves at the river mouths.
Yes.
If you wanted to move goods from the interior of the continent out to the ocean, or bring foreign goods inland, you had to go through a Cham port. They engaged in commerce, naval transport, and, quite frequently, piracy.
They essentially functioned as the gatekeepers between the continental interior and the maritime Silk Road.
Which is a highly lucrative position to be in.
Extremely. That network linked India, China, and the Indonesian archipelago. They derived immense wealth simply from being the unavoidable middlemen in that chain.
And this connection to the water, it was not just an economic calculation. It was the absolute core of their identity. It was woven directly into their mythology.
Yes, the origin stories are very revealing here.
According to Cham folklore, the founder of their people, Lady Ponagar, was not born on the earth. She supposedly materialized out of sea foam and atmospheric clouds.
Which is an origin story that perfectly reflects a society untethered to the soil.
Right.
But the evolution of that specific myth tells us everything we need to know about the eventual fate of the Champa.
How so?
Well, centuries later, when the expanding Vietnamese state finally conquered the last of the Cham territories, they did not just erase the Cham government, they actually appropriated Lady Ponagar.
Oh, they took the goddess for themselves.
They did. But they rewrote her biography entirely. They integrated her into their own pantheon under the name Phien Na.
Okay.
However, in the Vietnamese adaptation, she is stripped of her ethereal, oceanic origins entirely.
So no more sea foam.
No more sea foam. She is depicted as a humble peasant girl from the Dian Mountains.
A mountain peasant. That is a huge shift.
It is. The new myth claims she traveled on a floating log of sandalwood to China, married a prince, and then returned to Champa to teach the locals agriculture.
Agriculture.
Yes, prompting the construction of temples in her honor.
The psychological engineering there is, frankly, completely ruthless.
It is highly calculated.
The Chams have their founder manifesting from the ocean itself. And then the conquering culture takes that exact same deity, roots her in the dirt, makes her a mountain peasant, and gives her a backstory about traveling on a log and marrying into the Chinese cultural sphere.
It is the mythological equivalent of planting a flag.
Yeah, no kidding.
When an empire conquers a new territory, physical subjugation is only the first step. To legitimize their rule, they really must assert dominance over the spiritual landscape as well.
By adopting the local goddess, they claim a divine right to the land.
Exactly. But by altering her origin to fit agrarian terrestrial norms, they completely overwrite the indigenous maritime identity. They sever the goddess from the sea and anchor her to the mountain.
It visually and symbolically subjugates the conquered people's worldview. It is a total erasure of the maritime soul.
Yes, it is.
But I want to rewind the clock a bit.
Yeah.
Let's go back to before that conquest, back to when the Chams were at the height of their power.
Sure.
You have this network of toll booths, basically, these highly skilled seafarers controlling the river mouths. How does that setup actually govern itself?
That is a complex question.
I mean, if you do not have a centralized capital city with a king hoarding all the grain, how does it even become a recognized state?
Well, by the 2nd century, we do see the formal emergence of Champa. But it is critical to divorce ourselves from the idea of a monolithic, unified nation-state.
Okay, so what was it?
Champa was a confederation of independent principalities. Each major river valley or coastal enclave had its own ruler, its own port, and its own local administration.
So they were sharing a language, a culture, and a general economic strategy, but maintaining strict local autonomy.
That is correct.
Why did they not just conquer each other to consolidate power? I mean, that is what normally happens in history.
Because the geography and their economic model just did not require it. Think about it. If you are an agrarian king, the only way to increase your wealth is to conquer your neighbor's farmland.
Right, you need more dirt.
Exactly. But if your wealth comes from taxing international shipping at your specific river mouth, conquering the next river mouth over just stretches your military resources.
Oh, I see.
It does not necessarily increase the global trade volume. It was far more profitable for these principalities to cooperate, regulate the continental import-export market, and present a united cultural front to foreign merchants.
And during this period, stretching from the 2nd up through the 11th centuries, this decentralized network enters a profound golden age.
Yes, a long era of prosperity.
And the primary catalyst for this is, interestingly enough, the wind.
The monsoon winds, specifically. The maritime trade routes of the ancient world were entirely dictated by the seasonal monsoons. Merchants sailing from India or the Middle East toward China would ride the southwest monsoon.
So they get blown right across the ocean.
Yes. But when they reached the coast of Champa, the winds would often shift, or they would simply need to wait for the northeast monsoon to carry them back home.
Meaning you had hundreds, sometimes thousands, of foreign merchants, sailors, and scholars dropping anchor in Cham ports.
Exactly.
And they are living there for 4, 5, or 6 months at a time, waiting for the weather to change.
Right. And when people stay in a port for half a year, they do not just sit on their ships staring at the water.
No, they get off the boats.
They build warehouses, they socialize, they intermarry, and they share their belief systems.
It becomes a hub of cultural exchange.
Very much so. Through these prolonged periods of contact, the Champa underwent a huge process of Indianization. They absorbed Hinduism, specifically Shaivism, which is the worship of Shiva, as well as Mahayana Buddhism. They also adopted Sanskrit as a prestigious language of statecraft and religion.
And we can see the physical results of this immense surplus wealth and cultural absorption at the temple complex of Musun.
Yes, in central Vietnam.
This was not some minor local shrine. The architectural remnants show these highly intricate red brick towers adorned with stone reliefs.
It is a major archaeological site.
You see carvings of Hindu deities like Garuda, the mythical bird creature, locked in combat with the Naga, the serpent spirit.
The construction of Musun is deeply revealing about their society.
How so?
To build a complex on par with other major Southeast Asian monuments requires a highly organized labor force and vast material resources.
Right, which seems to contradict the idea of a decentralized government.
It does seem that way at first glance.
I mean, if they were a loose confederation of independent ports, how did they coordinate the construction of such a monumental religious center?
That is the specific genius of the Cham system. Their political independence allowed each port to be agile and responsive to shifting trade dynamics.
Okay.
But their shared cultural and religious identity, fostered by the adoption of Hinduism, provided a unifying mechanism.
So they came together for religion.
Exactly. The local rulers would pool their resources and direct their wealth inland to sites like Musun to legitimize their rule through religious patronage. They were basically competing for spiritual prestige rather than fighting over territory.
Okay, here is where we encounter a detail about their social structure that completely reframes how we view this society.
The matrilineal aspect.
Yes, historical records indicated Cham society was strictly matrilineal. Inheritance, property, and lineage passed exclusively through the mother.
That is correct.
There's a specific proverb cited from their culture regarding the intense value placed on female virtue and virginity before marriage. It goes, "As well leave a man alone with a girl as an elephant in a field of sugarcane."
It is an incredibly evocative proverb. It highlights the intense communal scrutiny placed upon young women in their society.
So what does this all mean? I have to push back on this a little because it feels somewhat contradictory.
In what way?
We are talking about a civilization widely known for being seafaring, fiercely independent, and heavily involved in piracy and maritime combat.
Yes, very militaristic on the water.
Those are historically male-dominated spheres of extreme aggression. Yet the absolute core of their society, who owns the land, who holds the wealth, who dictates the family line, is entirely matriarchal and fiercely protective of its women.
Right.
How do those two extremes function together?
They function together precisely because one is the necessary counterweight to the other.
Okay, walk me through that.
Think about the logistics of a thalassocracy. A huge percentage of the male population is going to be absent for months or years at a time.
Right, they are out on the boats.
They are sailing, trading, fighting, or unfortunately dying in storms. If your society tied its property ownership and its political stability to the men, the entire civilization would be in a constant state of precarious chaos.
Because the men are completely transient.
Yes. Land disputes would erupt every single time a fleet did not return. The men are entirely too transient to serve as the foundation of the society.
So by anchoring property, lineage, and social continuity to the women who remain permanently established in the coastal population centers, the Chams ensured ironclad stability at home.
Exactly. Regardless of what happened out on the water, the home front was secure.
That makes a lot of logistical sense.
The intense guarding of women, illustrated by that sugarcane proverb, was not merely about puritanical morality, it was about economic security.
Right, protecting the assets.
To protect a woman's lineage was to protect the title to the land and the wealth of the entire principality. The women were the bedrock that allowed the men to take immense risks at sea.
The women hold the fort so the men can go build the wealth.
Very well put.
And that wealth generation required them to extend their reach far beyond the coast of Vietnam. This brings us to a really interesting historical vignette regarding the Sulu archipelago in the modern-day Philippines.
Ah, yes. This occurs roughly between the 10th and 13th centuries.
What exactly happened there?
This specific interaction perfectly illustrates the friction that occurs when a highly organized mercantile culture drops into a different, societal matrix.
Okay.
A group of merchant Chams, referred to as the Orang Dampuan, established an outpost in Sulu. Their primary goal was commerce, and they quickly became extraordinarily wealthy.
But this wealth did not go unnoticed, right?
No, it did not. The native population of Sulu, the Brennans, grew increasingly envious of the Orang Dampuan's prosperity, and it escalated into severe violence.
It got very bloody.
Yes, the Brennans organized and slaughtered the Cham merchants in their territory.
Now, if the Chams were merely a loose guild of passive traders, that would have been the end of the story.
But they were not. They were a thalassocracy capable of projecting real naval force.
Right, so the Orang Dampuan organized a fleet, returned to Sulu, and executed a brutal retaliatory slaughter against the Brennans.
The fascinating part is what happens next.
Yeah, you would expect a generation of blood feuds after something like that.
You would. But historical accounts show that after the retaliation, harmonious commerce was relatively quickly restored.
They just went right back to trading.
They did. The Orang Dampuan went right back to trading with the Brennans because the economic imperative simply outweighed the desire for endless revenge.
Warfare is bad for business.
Exactly. Both sides realized that. The Brennans wanted the exotic goods the Chams provided, and the Chams wanted the profits from the Sulu markets.
So the violence established boundaries, and once those boundaries were violently negotiated, the trade just resumed.
Yes, and the Chams even ended up heavily influencing the local culture, transmitting elements of their Indianized societal structure to the Sulu region over time.
Well, their ability to influence foreign cultures went far beyond military retaliation or simply selling goods. They possessed a very potent form of soft power.
Yes, and it was driven directly by their matrilineal system.
Right. Chinese texts, specifically the Dai Zilu, record that Chinese merchants who frequented the Cham ports often married local Cham women.
What is fascinating here is that we see the brilliance of their social structure operating on an international level.
How so?
When a foreign merchant, whether from China, India, or the Middle East, married a Cham woman, he was marrying into a system where she held the property rights and the local social standing.
He is not the one in charge of the asset.
Right. He was not bringing her into his patriarchal structure. He was being absorbed into her matrilineal network.
So he becomes heavily incentivized to invest his wealth into her port.
It secured permanent, highly lucrative trade alliances. The foreign merchant gained favored status in a vital port, and the Cham Principality gained a dedicated, wealthy foreign agent.
That is a very smart system. And this strategy of intermarriage reached the absolute highest echelons of regional politics. It eventually acted as the catalyst for one of the most profound religious shifts in Southeast Asian history.
You are referring to their connection to the Majapahit Empire.
Yes. We have to look at this.
This occurs later in their history, but it demonstrates the immense reach of Cham's soft power. We have the historical figure of Queen Dwarawati.
Who was she exactly?
She was a Muslim princess from the kingdom of Champa, and she marries King Kertawijaya, who is the ruler of the Majapahit Empire based in Java.
And at the time, Majapahit was a deeply entrenched, highly powerful Hindu-Buddhist empire.
Yes, very established.
Right, so you have a Muslim princess moving into a Hindu-Buddhist royal court. How does she exercise influence?
Through the prestige of her lineage and her personal leverage within the royal household, her presence and her religious convictions slowly shifted the culture of the inner court.
And it worked.
It did. Through her influence, key members of the Majapahit royal family eventually converted to Islam.
That is a highly significant fulcrum point in history. A single Cham princess paves the way for the broader region of modern-day Indonesia to begin the transition toward Islam.
Yes. And the historical records also point to her nephew, Sunan Ampel. He was born in Champa in 1401.
Okay, 1401.
He travels to Java to visit his aunt, Queen Dwarawati, and he ends up remaining there to become one of the Wali Sanghas.
The Wali Sangha.
Yes, the revered 9 saints who are credited with spreading Islam throughout Java.
It perfectly illustrates how Cham mobility and matrilineal prestige served as a conduit for profound cultural transmission. They were moving ideologies just as efficiently as they were moving spices and ceramics.
They absolutely were.
But this timeline brings up a crucial point of clarification. If Sunan Ampel is born in Champa in 1401 and Queen Dwarawati is a Muslim princess, when exactly did Islam arrive in Champa?
The initial arrival of Islam tracks back to those same trade winds we discussed earlier.
Right, the monsoons.
Yes. Muslim merchants from Gujarat in India and directly from the Middle East began appearing in the Southeast Asian trade networks around the 9th century.
So the 800s.
Correct. They established small enclaves in the Cham ports. And by the early 14th century, around 1325, the writer Ad-Damashki notes that Champa is inhabited by both Muslims and idolaters living in close proximity.
By idolaters, he means Hindus and Buddhists.
Yes.
I want to pause on that 9th century arrival date, though, because it is easy to assume that if merchants arrived in the 800s, the Chams must have started converting immediately.
That is a very common misconception.
But modern historical analysis heavily disputes the idea of early, widespread Islamic conversion among the indigenous Chams. For decades, historians pointed to these ancient, Arabic-inscribed graves found in the region as proof of a huge early Muslim population.
Yes, and that assumption has been thoroughly debunked.
What did they find out?
A closer examination of those gravestones revealed that they were actually Tunisian in origin.
Tunisian.
Yes. They were not carved in Champa for local converts. They were brought over on foreign ships. They were likely used as heavy stone ballast to stabilize the hulls during the oceanic crossing.
Wait, really? So they were basically literal ship weights?
Exactly. And then they were discarded or repurposed upon arrival. They are not proof of a thriving 9th century Chams Islamic community.
That is wild.
Furthermore, early linguistic research that attempted to draw direct lines between ancient Cham vocabulary and Arabic has been dismissed by modern linguists.
So the timeline for conversion is much slower.
Much slower. The current historical consensus is that while Islam was undeniably present and known to the Chams for many centuries through foreign merchant enclaves, there is no sound evidence for widespread societal conversion of the local population until much later.
Really?
It gained serious momentum in the 16th and 17th centuries. It was a very slow, gradual accumulation of influence, largely driven by royal intermarriage and shifting trade networks, rather than a sudden religious revolution.
Okay, so to summarize their peak,
Yeah.
you have this highly adaptable, wealthy network of principalities. They are balancing ancient Hindu-Buddhist traditions with the slow introduction of Islam. They are using their matrilineal structure to absorb foreign wealth. But here is the fatal flaw in the thalassocracy model. While the ocean brings you unparalleled wealth, it also brings you directly into the crosshairs of land-hungry neighbors who want that wealth for themselves.
The wealth generated by controlling those maritime choke points was staggering, and it attracted the severe envy of the terrestrial empire surrounding them.
Naturally.
Moving into the 12th through the 15th centuries, the Champa principalities find themselves locked in an existential, multi-front clash of empires.
Let us start with their western border and the Khmer Empire. In 1177, the Chams initiate a major conflict, but they do it in a way that perfectly highlights their specific military genius.
They rely on what they know best.
Right. They do not draft a peasant army and march them through the dense jungle. Instead, they use their naval superiority. They sail a war fleet up the Mekong River, navigate into the Tamil Sap Lake, and launch a devastating, completely unexpected surprise attack.
And they successfully sacked the Khmer capital of Angkor?
Yes, it was a highly tactical maneuver. They essentially turned the interior rivers of the continent into an extension of the ocean.
They struck deep into the heart of a heavily fortified continental empire, using water as their highway. They bypassed the Khmer land defenses entirely.
It is a brilliant strike, but it is ultimately unsustainable. 4 years later, in 1181, the Khmer, under the leadership of King Jayavarman VII, reorganize.
Yes, and they utilized their vast demographic advantage.
Exactly. They decisively defeat the Cham forces and push them back to the coast.
The Khmer Wars were bloody, but the Khmer were not the ultimate existential threat to Champa.
Who was?
The true danger came from the north, driven by the relentless southward expansion of the Vietnamese state of Avet.
This requires us to look at the structural differences between these two societies. The Avet state was a deeply entrenched agrarian society, heavily influenced by the Chinese administrative model.
Their power was derived from intensive, meticulously managed rice cultivation. The Aviat system relied on village registers, taxation of farmland, and highly organized conscription. But rice agriculture requires constant territorial expansion to feed a growing population.
You always need more fields.
Exactly. As the Vietnamese population grew, their state mandated a southward march along the coast, and their territorial imperative directly collided with the Cham network of coastal principalities.
And the tension builds for centuries, culminating in a devastating turning point. The Cham-Vietnamese War of 1471.
1471 is the crucial year.
We need to look at the sheer scale of this conflict. to understand why the thalassocracy ultimately failed. This was not a border skirmish or a pirate raid.
No, it was total war.
The Avite state mobilized a highly disciplined, logistically supported army of 300,000 troops. The Cham principalities, fighting for their absolute survival, managed to field an army of 100,000 soldiers.
The numbers dictate the inevitable outcome here.
Yeah, 3-to-1 odds.
A maritime trade network based on coastal enclaves and mercenary forces simply cannot support the kind of dense, concentrated population required to counter a mobilized agrarian empire.
They just did not have the manpower.
The Avit had the bureaucratic machinery to feed, arm, and replace 300,000 men. The Chams fought fiercely to defend their homeland, but they were utterly crushed under the sheer demographic weight of an agrarian war machine.
Here is where it gets really interesting, though. The aftermath was catastrophic. Historical accounts report that 120,000 Chams were either captured or killed in the defeat.
It was a devastating loss of life.
The proud, wealthy network of independent principalities was effectively shattered. They permanently lost their northern territories and were reduced to a tiny, isolated enclave in the south, near modern-day Nha Trang.
And the geopolitical fallout from the 1471 defeat extended far beyond the immediate battlefield.
How so?
Because the Chams were the primary logistical facilitators of regional commerce, their sudden removal created an enormous economic vacuum. For instance, the historical record indicates that the lucrative trade in Vietnamese ceramics completely plummeted following the war.
Wait, if the Vietnamese won the war, why would their own ceramics trade plummet?
Because the Vietnamese were farmers and bureaucrats, not international merchants. They relied on the Cham fleets to transport those ceramics to foreign markets. With the Cham merchants dead, enslaved, or forced into exile, the Vietnamese had the goods but no viable way to distribute them globally.
That is a detail you do not often hear.
Okay.
The conquerors broke their own supply chain by destroying the middlemen.
They absolutely did.
And this localized collapse sent shockwaves all the way through the global trading system.
Yes, it reached very far.
The disruption of the Cham ports coincided with the arrival of European powers in Southeast Asia. Decades later, when the Portuguese conquered Malacca, they found the traditional South China Sea trading networks so thoroughly upended by the fall of Champa that Portuguese ships running the route to Macau had to fundamentally alter their logistics.
They had to change their entire route.
Yes, they bypassed the Vietnamese coast entirely and docked at Brunei instead. The erasure of the Champa effectively redrew the shipping lanes for the entire hemisphere.
And for the Cham people themselves, the defeat in 1471 triggered a vast diaspora.
They had to flee.
Yes. Thousands of Chams, utilizing their ancient maritime skills, fled across the sea to the Malay Peninsula, establishing refugee colonies in places like Malacca.
Right.
Others fled inland, seeking sanctuary in Cambodia. They sought refuge wherever their historical trade connections could offer them shelter.
But for the Chams who remained behind in that shrinking southern enclave, the military defeat in 1471 was merely the opening chapter of their subjugation.
Sadly, yes.
What followed over the next several centuries was a systematic, highly bureaucratic dismantling of their culture by the Vietnamese conquerors.
Moving from military occupation to total cultural annexation requires a different set of tools.
Definitely.
The Vietnamese administration understood that to truly absorb the Champa, they had to dismantle the foundational load-bearing structures of Cham society. And they accurately identified the most crucial structure of all, the matrilineage.
Okay, so they targeted the women.
They targeted the inheritance system. In 1499, the Vietnamese government enacted a highly specific law. They strictly banned marriage between Cham women and Vietnamese men across all social classes.
And simultaneously, they issued brutal directives ordering the execution of any Chams residing within the vicinity of the Vietnamese capital.
The violence is abhorrent, but we must deeply analyze the strategic, bureaucratic intent behind that 1499 marriage ban.
Right.
It is a masterpiece of legalized demographic warfare.
Because it targets the land ownership.
Precisely. Remember, under Cham law, inheritance, wealth, and property rights passed exclusively through the mother.
Yes.
If a Vietnamese man was permitted to marry a Cham woman under the local customs, that property would remain within the Cham matriarchal line, protecting the economic base of the Cham community.
So they closed that loophole.
By legally outlawing those specific marriages, the Vietnamese state actively prevented the legal transfer and protection of Cham land. It severed the primary mechanism that allowed Cham identity and wealth to persist at the village level.
It is essentially a slow-motion, state-sponsored robbery of an entire culture's inheritance.
That is exactly what it was.
And this demographic pressure was compounded by external factors. In the 17th and 18th centuries, following the collapse of the Ming dynasty in China, thousands of Chinese refugees fled south.
Primarily young, unmarried males.
Right. And they were permitted by the Vietnamese to settle extensively on the remaining Cham lands.
Crucially, because these Chinese refugees were not ethnically Vietnamese, they fell outside the purview of the 1499 marriage ban. Oh, I see.
So they freely took Cham women as wives.
But the outcome was entirely different from those early Golden Age marriages with Chinese merchants we talked about earlier.
Very different.
Back then, the merchant was absorbed into the Cham port. Now, with the Cham state fractured and powerless, the dynamic inverted. Historical records note that the children of these new unions identified far more strongly with Chinese culture and patriarchal norms.
Which rapidly diluted the indigenous Cham presence on their own ancestral lands?
It was a multi-generational process of bureaucratic erasure. But the final political death blow did not occur until the 19th century.
Right, in 1832.
In 1832, the Vietnamese Emperor Minh Mang officially annexed the very last remaining Champa kingdom, Panduranga. The political entity of Champa, which had maintained some form of existence since the 2nd century, was completely dissolved.
And Emperor Minh Mang did not simply absorb the territory. He instituted a vicious policy of forced assimilation, aimed directly at breaking the religious identities of the Cham people. The accounts of this period are incredibly grim.
They are very hard to read.
The Vietnamese forces coercively fed lizard and pig meat to the Muslim Chams, and they forced the Hindu Chams to consume cow meat.
We need to pause and recognize the profound weight of those actions.
It is awful.
This goes far beyond physical violence or political reorganization. It is absolute psychological and spiritual warfare.
It is weaponizing their deepest religious taboos against them.
Yes. When an empire forces a conquered population to physically consume that which their faith deems impure or forbidden, they are attempting to shatter the spiritual will of the individual.
Right.
It is a demonstration of ultimate humiliating power. The empire is dictating not just who taxes the land, but what enters the bodies and the souls of the subjugated people. It is designed to induce religious trauma and break their connection to the divine.
So how does a society even begin to process that level of violation? When your land is seized, your marriage laws are dictated by a foreign power to sever your inheritance, and your religious dietary laws are weaponized to spiritually break you. I mean, the only reaction left is violent resistance.
And that is exactly what occurred.
Right.
The religious persecution under Minh Mang sparked an immediate and desperate backlash. In 1832, a prominent Cham Muslim leader named Khatib Sumat, who had spent time being educated in Kelantan, returned and declared a jihad against the occupying Vietnamese forces.
It was a fierce uprising, but it was suppressed.
Yes, it was put down.
Yet the resistance did not end there. A second, highly organized revolt ignited shortly after, led by a Bani cleric named Jathok Wah.
They established a coordinated Cham resistance movement.
And they fought a bitter guerrilla war from 1834 until it was finally bloodily crushed by Minh Mang's superior forces in July of 1835.
The reprisals were devastating.
Very much so. By 1885, records indicate that only 40,000 Chams remained alive in the old Panduranga territory.
The rebellions were a heroic but ultimately doomed attempt to reclaim their sovereignty. The demographic and military disparity was simply insurmountable.
By the late 19th century, the Chams had been comprehensively defeated, militarily, politically, and demographically.
Which brings us to the most compelling aspect of this entire deep dive.
Yes, the survival. Given that relentless, centuries-long campaign of systemic erasure, how do the Chams even exist today? Because they do exist.
They do.
Their survival is a testament to their capacity for adaptation. Without a nation-state to protect them, they relied on creating highly localized cultures, fearfully guarding their language, and maintaining a profound culinary legacy.
When a people are entirely deprived of a political state, their culture effectively becomes their nation. For the Chams, this survival mechanism is most vividly expressed in their religious syncretism. Following the total collapse of their empire, the Chams remaining in Vietnam fractured into highly distinct, fiercely localized religious groups.
Let us examine the Balaman Chams first. This group adheres to an indigenized form of Hinduism known as Ahir.
Yes, and it is vital to note that this is not just a direct copy of modern Indian Hinduism.
No.
It has been fundamentally molded to fit the ancient Cham worldview. They worship in temples they refer to as stupas or baimong in the Cham language, and they maintain a highly structured three-tiered ranking system for their priesthood.
Tell us about those ranks.
The highest rank in their clerical hierarchy is the Po Adiya, followed by mid-level priests known as the Po Tapa, and the junior initiates are the Po Pasa.
Okay.
What is truly remarkable about the Balaman Chams is that their practices represent an unbroken, continuous spiritual lineage dating all the way back to the 5th century.
That is a very long time.
They have maintained this indigenous Hindu structure through the fall of their kingdom, the Vietnamese conquest, and centuries of foreign administration.
And living geographically alongside them, often in separate but adjacent villages sharing the same foundational culture, are the Chambani.
Yes, the Chambani.
This group practices a localized version of Islam that is entirely unique to their history. The term Bani itself is derived from the Arabic word for people.
The theology of the Chambani is a masterclass in survival through syncretism.
How do they blend it?
They took elements of Sunni Islam and Sufi mysticism and seamlessly blended them with ancient pre-Islamic Cham beliefs that include sympathetic magic, spirit worship, and the deep veneration of the souls of former Cham kings.
So it is highly localized.
Yes. To an outside observer unfamiliar with their history, their rituals might even be mistaken for a form of Hinduism because they are so deeply embedded in the ancient Cham matrix.
The practical applications of their faith are really interesting too. They observe Ramadan, which is their localized version of Ramadan.
But a primary focus of this month is praying to Allah for the salvation of their deceased ancestors.
Right. Their imams, known by the title Akar, spend the entire month praying inside their specific mosques, which they call Thang magic.
But perhaps the most revealing detail about this group is their self-identification.
Right. They do not usually call themselves Muslim.
Many Bani practitioners explicitly reject the term Muslim. They prefer to be called Bani, identifying far more closely with their localized, indigenized ethnic faith rather than tying themselves to the broader global Islamic community.
It functions as a powerful cultural defense mechanism.
It absolutely does.
By creating and strictly adhering to a faith that is entirely unique to their specific geography and historical trauma, the Chambani ensure that their religious identity cannot be fully absorbed, dictated, or standardized by outside forces.
Whether those forces are the Vietnamese state or Orthodox global Islam, it belongs solely to them.
There is also a third primary religious group among the Chams, located mostly in Cambodia and southern Vietnam, who practice mainstream Sunni Islam, largely adhering to the Shafi'i school.
But even within this Orthodox group, the instinct for local adaptation remains strong.
Yes. Historical records note a small, highly specific sect known as the Kamjumat.
Yes, the Kamjumat.
According to their intensely localized interpretation of theology, they only perform prayers on Fridays, and they observe the fasting of Ramadan for a total of only 3 days.
It is very unique. Yet, regardless of whether a Cham individual identifies as Balaman, Bani, or Sunni, they remain deeply united by their ancestral language.
The language is key.
The Cham language is an Austronesian tongue with incredibly deep historical roots. The Dong Yen Chau inscription, discovered in the region and dating back to the 4th century, stands as the oldest known written attestation of any Austronesian language on Earth.
That is a huge historical milestone. And beyond language, they are united by shared cultural traditions that completely transcend their religious divisions.
Yeah.
We discussed earlier the immense importance their ancient society placed on young women and matriarchal lineage. That core value survives completely intact today through the Karo ceremony.
The Karo is a profoundly significant rite of passage for young Cham girls.
What happens during it?
It marks their transition from infancy into puberty and marriageable age, typically performed when a girl reaches 15. The cultural weight attached to this ceremony is immense.
No, it is mandatory.
Very much so. If the Karo has not been performed, the girl is considered tabung, spiritually incomplete or taboo, and she absolutely cannot marry.
Wow. I mean, that is a powerful, ongoing reinforcement of the matriarchal focus that built their original empire.
It is, and it is highly revealing to contrast the gravity of the Karo ceremony with the traditions prescribed for Cham boys.
Right. Historical accounts note that while the Muslim Chams do practice circumcision for boys, It is largely symbolic.
Yes.
It is often performed purely ritualistically using a toy wooden knife. The true, undeniable cultural weight of passage is placed firmly on the girls.
Now, if we want to look at the ultimate mechanism of cultural survival, how a defeated people endure the centuries, we have to examine the most universal medium of cultural transmission: food.
The culinary legacy. Cham food is a direct reflection of their diverse maritime history.
Yes, it is.
You have traditional staple dishes like muthan ritong, which is a specific preparation of rice with fish, and you have highly localized delicacies like tung lamau, a unique beef sausage that remains a prized specialty of the Cham communities in Anjiang province.
But the true enduring legacy of Cham cuisine lies in its profound influence on the very people who conquered them.
Which is such an interesting twist.
Because of their maritime nature, the Chams extensively utilized various types of fermented fish pastes, known broadly as mam, to preserve proteins for long sea voyages and inland trade.
Right, you need something that won't spoil on a boat.
Exactly. Two specific varieties, mam nem and mam ruk, were the absolute bedrock of the Cham flavor profile.
And when the Vietnamese Empire expanded southward and militarily annexed Champa, they did not just take the physical land.
No.
They absorbed the local agriculture, the fishing techniques, and ultimately the flavor profiles of the people they conquered. Mum Nem and Mam Ruk were adopted by the Vietnamese and became absolutely foundational ingredients in modern Central Vietnamese cuisine.
Which is a fact many people do not realize.
Mum Ruk, in particular, is the essential defining ingredient required to make bun bo hu, which is arguably one of the most famous and beloved noodle dishes in all of Central Vietnam today.
It presents a profound historical irony.
It really does. The conquerors literally ingested the culture of the conquered. The political boundaries of the Champa Empire were violently erased from the map, their cities were sacked, and their armies were destroyed.
But the defining taste of modern Central Vietnam is undeniably, intrinsically Cham.
The legacy of this ancient maritime empire is served in millions of bowls of broth every single day.
It is a remarkable testament to human resilience. Their government was dismantled, their marriage laws were outlawed to steal their land, and their dietary laws were weaponized to break their spirits.
Yet, through their highly localized faiths, their ancient Austronesian language, their enduring matriarchal traditions, and their foundational food, the Champa people endure.
Which leaves us with a compelling thought to consider for you listening.
Let's hear it.
The Champa built their immense wealth and power on the inherent fluidity of the ocean. They embraced change, they thrived on the unpredictable winds of international trade, and they actively welcomed outside influence, weaving foreign religions and merchants into their own identity.
Right.
Ultimately, they were crushed by the rigid, unyielding, land-based borders of expanding agrarian empires that sought to fence them in and control the earth.
The dirt versus the water.
Yes. But perhaps it is exactly that fluid, adaptable nature, their unique ability to syncretize Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islam into entirely new, localized forms that allowed their core cultural identity to survive without the protection of a physical nation-state.
That makes a lot of sense.
What happens to a maritime soul when it is entirely landlocked? The history of the Champa suggests that it does not disappear. It simply adapts, seeping deeply into the very soil, the faith, and the culture of the land that tried to contain it.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.